Let's start exploring, hey? See what damage we've got. Just gonna take off some bits and pieces and I'll take you on a journey of top-end engine exploration.
Front of me, jeez. It's getting deep.
Welcome everybody to my channel. If you're a regular viewer, you probably heard me saying a few videos ago that I'll never make another video in this man cave of mine. If you're new to the channel, yes, Sally, I call this a man cave underneath my wife's dryer. But due to exigent circumstances around the catastrophic breakdown of my motorbike and an overwhelming response to my little YouTube channel for people wanting to know what happened and can I fix it, I put myself back in the hot seat for hopefully the last video in this man cave. I do have a new man cave coming my way very shortly. I'm waiting to build a new house, so I'm super excited about that. But for now, let's discuss this poor bike and what happened. For this video to make sense, I probably need to put a little bit of context out there. So as you can see from the following clips, I was on an awesome 5,000 plus kilometer ride with Josh JB from Cairns to Cape York and back down the Brizzy way. And my poor motorbike had a major breakdown where a piece of my carburetor slide went into the engine and shut my bike down, and that's all she wrote. As you can see, I had a 155 kilometer tow job by ironically another DRZ400E to get to the nearest town to really just worry logistically how am I going to get myself and my poor Sally 2,500 kilometers home without a running motorcycle, which is another story in itself. If you haven't seen what happened, go to the description. There is a link there which shows everything that happened with the breakdown and how we got my bike 155 kilometers to the next town, which was Hewarden. So once the logistic plans came in place, I got home myself about a week ago. And as I've filmed today, the bike has been out of my possession for 2.5 weeks. So it actually only arrived today. It's still got all the red dust from Cape York all over it. It's still missing bolts that I've actually took home my bags and forgot to put on the bike, but it's here and now it's time to figure out what went wrong. So in this video, I'm going to film me pulling apart the bike, but pretty much fast track it, and I'm going to stop at every crucial moment, but I do not know what the damage of this bike is. I know what happened. I know that the piece of metal's gone into my engine, but I don't know if it's major damage, minor damage. Is it just me literally pulling out a piece of metal and going, wow, the bike's going to run again? Regardless, the bike needs a lot of love and I'm going to try and do my best to get it running again. Effectively going to be rebirthing her in my garage. But before we get to all the greasy parts, so to speak, of me getting my hands dirty, 3 things I want to mention before we get to it. Number 1, I am not a mechanic. I'm a do-it-yourself sort of bloke, as you can see by where I'm sitting. I rely heavily on this owner's manual when I don't know what I'm doing. If I do know what I'm doing, it's because my dad's taught me and or I've just had the experience. But please, everything I do, it's not to a professional level. So I only use this information as you see fit, but disclaimer, not a mechanic. Number 2, you can probably see this half pulled apart engine already. I must give a massive shout out. He knows who he is, to a bloke called Jason who lives in Gold Coast, Queensland. He saw what happened to my bike and effectively donated me, from what I understand, a running 2007 DRZ400E engine minus the clutch. I've already pulled it apart. I've got it down to the 2 pieces of crankcase and the bottom end. I'm just looking at the quality of that engine, and I may use parts from that to get mine going again. But Jason, your generosity is, it goes beyond measure, to be honest. You didn't ask for any money or anything like that. You just truly donated something to a bloke in need. So thank you so much. If you're ever down my way and I'm free, I'll certainly go on a ride with you as well, because I know you do have a running DRZ400E right now. And number 3, I'm probably going to be in all sorts of clothes, not because I get changed all the time, but this job's going to take me a fair few weeks, unfortunately. I just don't have all the time in the world to allocate to this bike. But in saying that, let's go exploring and find out what went wrong with this bike, and I'll stop and show you every time I find something that what I think is important anyway. So I'm just at the point where I'm about to take out the culprit of all this, the carburetor, but I hate trying to take this thing in and out of the motorbike. It is such a dodgy job, and just really the only trick to it is to loosen the subframe, try to drop the rear end a little bit, and then try to pull it out that way. But it is just a nightmare to get out, simple as that. So I've pulled the carburetor out. I've kept all the hoses attached. It's just easier for me to relocate there. But anyway, here it is. Hopefully you can see that, but that bit in here that's broken off is meant to have a piece of metal there. So that little bit of metal has gone into my intake. But as you can see, when I turn the accelerator, that slide goes up, down, up, down, up, down. So no doubt just wear and tear, excessive vibrations. Perhaps when you release it quickly, it's just weakened that part in there, and you know, that's all she wrote. She's done. Finally, I've got the mighty single cylinder DRZ400E engine out of the frame and on the workbench. Obviously I'm doing this video because of a broken carby slide, and I know it's gone into the engine and caused some damage. So realistically, I would have left the engine in the frame, I would have left this whole side on, and I'd only be working off the top end of the engine, and I'd be doing that in the bike. It's far, far more easy to work on the engine in the bike when you're just trying to undo a few bits. The reason why I do have my engine out is because I thought, you know what, the bike's had a hard life. I'm doing a major overhaul anyway, so for my own peace of mind, I'm going to strip the whole thing back. I'm going to break the crankcases in half. I'm going to look at every single component whilst I have the opportunity to, but also because I've actually got this, a second-hand crankcase on the sump side, because I've actually stripped my sump many, many years ago here, and that's actually now just got a lot of gasket maker and holding my bolt in there, and I empty my oil out of my clutch case and I just tip the bike to the side. So I'm going to take the opportunity, whilst I've been donated this part from the lovely bloke called Jason, and everything's in really good nick in here, I'm going to put that on my engine so I can empty my oil properly like most people should. But anyway, let's get into the exciting bits and start breaking down this. Not that exciting for me, but it's going to be exciting to see what has actually gone wrong. And hopefully if you've had a similar problem, you could expect the same sort of damage, no doubt. So let's get into it. Let's start exploring, hey? See what damage we've got. Just going to take off some bits and pieces, and I'll take you on a journey of top-end engine exploration. So I'm now just taking off the top cover. I don't know why. I've got a little bit of adrenaline because I have in my head, if there's major damage, that it's fixable, it's going to be a big ball kit for me, which I've never done, but I think I'll be a perfect candidate to talk about such a thing once I've got it on the engine and see the difference to stock, and or is it only minor damage and I can just leave as is and just replace a couple of components. I just don't know. Exciting. And I've still got to learn how to put this thing back together and hope she kicks over. That's a worry. So I'm not expecting any damage in here. As you can imagine, the carburetor is sitting here, and a piece of it got taken through the intake here, which is under this, and no doubt is sitting in this sort of area here where the cylinder and piston are, and caused some damage there. But I kind of feel like the bike doesn't start because of lack of compression, because of damage, but we're going to find out very shortly. So now they should just pop out nicely. Number one. This one is the exhaust side, number two. I'm not actually going to film myself putting every single component back on this bike, but if you were doing something similar like this, you've got to read the manual and you've got to get these in the right position. They've got all sorts of indicators on the outside of the wheels here to show the correct timing. So make sure if you're playing around with that, you don't just chuck them in and hope for the best. You've got to line things up in a certain way. FYI. As you can see, I've had to lay the engine down. If this was in the frame of the bike, this would be a much easier job, because the amount of torque I need just throws the engine around, and it's hard to keep steady. So if you had it in the bike, much easier job for the top end, that is. I just want to see some obvious damage. So I go, yep, I need to fix that, and I want to see the piece of metal just sitting there in an ideal world, so I know it's all out of the engine, but things never ever go that smoothly for me. Here we go. Let's see. Getting caught on the gasket of all things. How's that possible? All right. No obvious signs yet. Oh man. Don't want all these shims to fall out. Well, there's a bit of metal. So I don't quite know how it's gotten there, but there is metal there. So I also found this little bit of metal. It looks like that the backs of these two, which are my exhaust side, it looks like they're just corroding or breaking down. I don't think that's the metal from the carby slide. Not that I 100% say that, but yeah, these aren't looking too healthy on the outsides of them. Don't know what the GoPro's showing, but okay, we keep looking. I need a bit more signs of damage than that to be conclusive anyway. So I'm just about to pull the cylinder off. I'm not finding any major chunks of metal so far in this section. Obviously I had the bits in the top end section just before, so I've got to really pull that apart properly and just make sure there's no other further internal damage. But I'm just trying to look for that major sign, but maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe the bit of metal just broke into smithereens and just caused enough damage that maybe it just wasn't getting enough compression and whatnot. But let's see what this shows. So I've just taken the cylinder off, and to be honest, it looks pretty decent in there. I mean, it could be due for a rehoning and whatnot, but there's no obvious signs of divots or dents or scratches. But all along the top ring here, like if I run my finger there, I know it's a bit greasy, but I am picking up bits of metal that obviously shouldn't be in there. So I can only assume that piece of metal's gone in here and just been bouncing up and down and just been absolutely obliterated, and it's just turned into absolute mush. So not really enough, you wouldn't think, to shut the engine down, but perhaps the damage is in the section above this, and that was causing all my problems. But I'm actually pretty happy with how that looks overall. So I've just pulled this out. The rings are looking a bit how you go, and they do have specks of metal on it. But more concerning is this, not necessarily the discoloration, but just there's divots in it. Like you can see where the metal has just been going smacking around and probably been broken up, and just caused a fair bit of what I would say non-uniformed damage now, and it's just not a smooth surface. So the discoloration is quite normal at times, but definitely this is going to have to be replaced. There's no obvious sign of, hey, your ring's busted out, that's your problem. So the safest bet is to replace this and to replace the cylinder, to be honest. Even though I think the best fix for this would just be a whole new top end, I'm still going to separate these crankcases, also to repurpose the other one I spoke about earlier in the video. But I'll keep looking because there still might be some signs of damage inside here. So as a result, I'll film it. But this here is a do-it-yourself crank separating tool by yours truly, the apprentice adventurer. I looked at buying a proper tool, and they were anywhere from $200 to $500. There's some dodgy second-hand ones, but at the end of the day, I've made this. It does the job perfectly, and this whole thing, apart from drilling some holes, cost me $23, and I've already tested it, and it works absolutely perfectly. So do yourself a favor, if you want to do it on the cheap, a bit of 8mm thick mild steel so it's nice and strong, 3 holes, the centerpiece, and we're just going to pull this apart, and I'll show you how. But if you are going to make your own crank splitting tool, I've got a fairly thick piece of mild steel, 3 points of contact all the way down, and then I've just got 2 little nuts holding the plate from falling down. And then this center bolt's a pretty basic design, but I hold a shifter on the center nut, and then I start turning that down, and then it starts pulling this apart against the main shaft here, which is what the proper crank pulling tools do anyway. The only word of advice is you've got to make sure this hole is center before you drill these, because if this is not center onto this piece, it's just going to pull unevenly and probably cause some damage. So I've tested this, it works beautifully, and only $23. So if you don't have a motorbike shop, you don't need to use it every day, that's the way to go for sure. So obviously this is a bit more clunky than a professional tool, but this is already slowly pulling apart here. The other thing I've learnt though, even though it's pulling apart here, there's another dowel on this side of the engine, and because you're pulling it here, it's kind of uneven. So on this side of the engine, there's a little flange here. Now I'm not sure if that's actually by design or not, but what you do is you put a piece of wood hanging out and just tap it with a mallet to break the dowel off on this side, and then you can continue pulling the crank apart. So I'm just going to tap here. You've got someone to hold the engine, that's preferable, but that's already coming off. So now I've got an even break on everything. Put that there, and then I'm going to start turning again, bit by bit. So yeah, as you can see, here's a dowel here that we've got to break the top of, but the other one is down in here, and because it pulls unevenly, we've got to make sure that gets a gap as equal to this gap. Otherwise, you could potentially cause some damage. And so now we've got one crankcase halve, which I'm going to suss all that out. Then I'll suss everything out in here. But if this all checks out, I'm simply going to rejoin this. I do believe there's no issues down below. I'll rejoin my two halves. I'll do that off camera. All right, so I've stripped the bike back. I've rebuilt half the engine, and all the parts in front of me are the parts of concern effectively. But as you can see, I've put my two crankcases back together, and providing I've done that properly, there is zero damage in the bottom half of the engine. And for 30,000 kilometers, I'm really happy with how the bottom end components look. They look absolutely pristine, which means none of the stripped bits of metal from this went down into the bottom end and caused any damage. So I've put that back together. It's sitting on the bike ready to go. So the damage report and what the fix will be for me, and no doubt maybe someone like yourself who've had a similar breakdown, I've had a few days to think about it and put my mind to it. So this is what I've come up with. But as you can see from the piston head, you probably can't see it on camera, but there's quite a few little divots and signs of damage on the actual head there. And these piston rings, not that I've measured them, they do feel a lot looser than what the other piston head from the spare engine was. However, more of concern, there were little, I guess, specks or shards of metal attached to the oily residue on the ring. So regardless, this needs to be replaced. Which then takes me to my top end unit, which has got the cams and the valves and whatnot. You won't be able to see down the intake there, but there's actual chunks of metal stuck on the intake valve on the inside. But then oddly enough, if we have a look here, the actual exhaust valves have got, here's a bit of metal falling off there, they've got bits of metal jammed up in there, so obviously not ideal at all. So that's quite a bit of damage in my books. So for me, that means these need to be replaced. If you're going to replace one, you've got to replace them all, in my opinion. That's a fair bit of money. Like it's a few $100s to replace all those items. And I'd probably have to get this machined. I can't confirm or deny if I do, but you probably need to get it machined just to bring it back in line with what it should be like after that damage. So I did have a look at my original cylinder, but it actually looks really good. So that doesn't need to be replaced if I didn't want to. However, that brings me back to the culprit, the carby. Here is the brains of the operation, the carby. I'm going to put that down here. Here is what has caused all the damage. That one little piece of metal has caused me to pull my whole bike apart and suss out what has gone wrong. So that there is just, some people call it a flat plate, some people call it a carby slide. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a piece of metal that controls the amount of air and fuel that goes in your bike. It sits on this, which goes up and down as you pull the throttle. And you can clearly see why these things are weakened in this area. It's one of those things that may break, may not break, unknown to break if you get a cheaper one, unknown not to break if you get an expensive one, but regardless of what's happened, mine has broken. And also what I found out too is that the top cap gasket actually wasn't seated properly, and my carby was full of red dirt where this sits. And for those that don't know, it's just an FYI, it sits up in here, and I had all this red dirt in here that I had to clean out, but it didn't make it down into the actual air and fuel area. So definitely keep an eye on something like that. I don't know who put that on there, but it certainly wasn't seated right at all. So now I need a new one of those. Thankfully the carby's in good nick. I can still clean the insides of that. So that brings me to the fix. Providing I've put my bottom end of my engine back together, because I have split the crankcases and joined them again. Providing I've done that properly, all the components in there look spot on. They all measure really good. So I've got no dramas with that, as long as I haven't done the wrong thing in putting it together. So for me, I think I'm going to be a perfect candidate to put a big bore kit on the bike. The reason why I'm going to do that, because if I buy one of these and a ring set and a cam chain and get my cylinder rehoned, I'm already up for around $500 or $600. So for an extra $400, I can get a brand new cylinder, brand new piston, rings, the whole kit, and I get the big bore kit. So I'll bolt that straight onto the bike, and then this will go straight on top of the big bore kit, and I believe that'll be totally fine. then I need to source one of these, and you wouldn't think so, but in Australia, not many people stock such a thing. Obviously I can go to the Suzuki dealership, but I want one relatively quickly, so I'm gonna have to shop around, but they're looking at about $120 to $150 just for this item. So that's the fix for me. That's what it's gonna look like. And the perfect bit about this is, I think with 30,000 kilometers on my bike, a 6-year owner, I think I'm gonna need a perfect person to put a big ball kit on and actually give a solid review about it, because my bike's completely stock standard in terms of performance. So I'll notice real quickly what the big ball kit will do to my bike. And I'm hoping to maintain the 1544 sprocket setup with the big bore kit. I'm hoping that livens up the whole bike with the extra power. So that's where I'm at. I'm gonna order some parts. I'll rebuild the bike off camera, and the next time you see some footage will be me having the whole bike built and giving Sally's a little electric starter press, and hopefully she fires into life and everything runs beautifully. All right, the moment of truth. I've got the old girl out, Sally 2.0. We've got power, which is obviously a very good thing. We've got fuel on. We've got choke on. But this is a very nervous moment for me because I've stripped this whole thing back. Obviously the actual bits I replaced didn't require pulling all this apart, but yeah, I've had to put the whole bike together purely to press the start button. As I turn things manually, everything's working, but the moment of truth. Let's see, she's going to start. Please start, please start. Give it a few turns, get some fuel in there. Come on, go. Oh, yes. I knew she'd struggle because I pulled the whole thing apart and a lot of displaced oil and whatnot, but it's firing. Yes! Yes. Sally 2.0. Oh, can't wait to see how much power I've got. I'll just wait for all this stuff to burn off, give the bike a proper warm up. But the next video about this bike will be a big bore review on a DRZ400E. Stay tuned for that. Alright, Sally 2.0, here we go.